and welcome to One, the Brightmont Academy podcast. I'm your host, Griffin Rouse. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Today on the podcast, we are honored to have Tony Beals, the director of Brightmont Academy Seattle's campus, and we are so grateful to have you here, Tony. How are you doing this evening?
Doing great. I'm glad to be here, Griffin.
So, Tony, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of what makes Brightmont special and how you ended up at Brightmont and a few other things. And then we're going to kind of open this thing up for a larger conversation, maybe some questions from our audience. And then we'll kind of go from there. Now, before we get started, we're going to tell you a little bit about Brightmont Academy's open house event, as always. Every month, Brightmont opens their doors to prospective parents and students to explore their campuses, meet the dedicated staff, and see firsthand how one-to-one instruction model helps students thrive. If your child needs a more personalized learning experience, this is the perfect opportunity to discover if Brightmont is the right fit. Don't miss out. RSVP for a tour now at brightmontacademy.com and take the first step toward a brighter future. Again, my name is Griffin Rouse. I'm the host for tonight's podcast. I'm an ADHD coach who specializes in working with kids who are having emotional dysregulation as part of their ADHD. So that means if your kid is slamming doors or screaming or stomping up the stairs or throwing things across the room, you give me a call and we try to help you guys manage those emotions and help them figure out how to reduce some of that stuff a little bit. Tony, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got here.
Absolutely. So I've been in education for about 30 years. And one of the things that I found as a neurodivergent person myself is that education doesn't necessarily fit every student. And so what I wanted to do was I have gotten more involved in public, private education, non-traditional education to kind of see what fit and how could we create a model where all students could be successful. And that's how I ended up finding Brightmont. I love the model. I love the mission. And for the last 13 years, have just loved the way that I've seen it change students' lives.
Yeah, so you've been in Brightmont for a long time, Tony. 13 years is a while. How has Brightmont changed? Kind of what about Brightmont really kind of not keeps you there, but what about Brightmont kind of excites you and motivates you to be there for 13 years?
Every student is different. Every student is a puzzle. And so every year is different. It's not like it's 13 years of redundancy, and one thing I've loved about Brightmont is that from the top down, from CEO to all the way down to everybody throughout the organization, everybody's aligned with the same mission. That no matter what we do and the decisions we make, it's always about individual child learning. That's it. It's very simple. And so to me, that keeps me going, knowing that I'm doing it for the right reasons and that I am approaching education the right way.
And so, you mentioned approaching education the right way. I think we're going to talk a little bit as we go here about sort of the state of education now and what role Brightmont is filling. But tell me a little bit about sort of how do you all work with students? How do you all kind of get beyond maybe what you're reading or what you're told about this kid from other schools? And how do you kind of get to a place where you can understand and see that kid for who he is and see his potential, frankly, for what it is?
It's definitely looking beyond the external. A lot of students, you look at them and you'll see behaviors, you'll see what an IEP says about a student. But, what I find is most effective is just talking to them, letting their guard down, hearing how they explain things, looking at how their mind processes, giving them time to think and to respond authentically on topics that they're interested in. I find that by doing that, I can discover so much about a student's potential and then start to think about, what does this look like in a classroom? How can we personalize learning around this student? If we're going to do an argumentative essay and the student hates writing because the mechanics are too slow for how fast their brain moves, and we're doing a topic they don't understand, now you're doing a non-preferred task on a non-preferred topic.
Yep.
Right. But if this kid is a Minecraft, loves Minecraft, then why don't we do an argumentative essay on Minecraft versus Roblox? You can explain it to me orally, so you reduce the distance from brain to ear.
Yep.
And then put it all together.
That's, I think, two of the most common accommodations I suggest parents ask for. One is let their kid pick the topic, because you're right. It's a non-preferred task and a non-preferred topic. And writing about something I have no interest in, that is very difficult for me to understand, that is very nuanced, and I just have a hard time it just amplifies the difficulty level tremendously. And at that point, and we're going to talk more about this, but at that point, you're really gauging that kid's management of their executive functions, management of this disorder known as ADHD or other neurodivergencies that people experience. You're not gauging their ability to understand and talk about and explain a concept or form an argumentative essay about a concept. I love this idea about Minecraft versus Roblox. I think I've got a few kids who I think that would really land with. I tell you, Tony. Um, I I also like that, you talked about this idea around seeing behaviors and getting beneath them. I think
Mhm.
far too often we spend time worrying about a behavior and not what's causing that behavior. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how you all get beneath or behind the behavior to understand how to help that kid with what's causing the behavior?
Yeah, so anytime I interact with a student, I'm always learning. Yeah, I'm learning about them. And so, for example, I had a student that came in here that was always in trouble at school and was getting kicked out of schools. And when I was sitting here watching them, I'm talking with him, and the whole time his eyes are shifting around, and he's got his head down, and I just kind of stopped the conversation. I go, "Man, your brain is like flying right now, isn't it?" And he just stopped. He goes, "Yeah." And I go, "Let me guess. One, you don't like to write. Two, you're constantly in trouble, and so you're waiting for something to happen. Three,
Mm-hmm.
you're not being able to convey necessarily everything you want on the spot. You're worried I'm going to ask you something and you're going to go blank." And so I go through all these things, but it's just because of the body language and actually looking beyond what everybody else is looking at or listening to and seeing how does the student approach the world and how much of them is conditioned versus how much is really them, and then
It,
helping them to know that you understand them.
it sounds like what you're able to do with that approach is kind of get beneath what a colleague calls it the tangibility bias that people have as sort of
Mhm.
just human beings. We're more biased what we can see, hold, touch, and as a result, we tend to focus that bias on behaviors. And when you look beneath that, when you ask questions, when you pay attention to body language, when I tell a lot of parents, I want you to follow that kid's lead because they'll give you the cues, they'll give you the
Mhm.
signs of what they need or when they need or how they need it. But they don't yet have the words to tell you that because they're 15, 16 years old, oftentimes younger, and it's really difficult for them to put words to it. So being able to notice the body language, notice the eyes darting back and forth, notice these more subtle cues that when you know what to look for become really obvious, right? But it's
Mhm.
hard because we don't teach people or tell people what to look for and how to look for it. So it's really great that you all have this ability, this staff that have the training, that have the understanding of how to see these things. Seems to
Yeah,
make a
and
big
I think
difference.
yeah, absolutely, and understanding that students, especially with ADHD, are running with like 9 or 10 different streams of thought at one time.
Hmm.
And saying, you know what, I know what's going through your head right now. You're thinking about the sounds, the smells, you're looking at what's going on outside the window, and you're listening. But the thing is that most people don't know they're listening because asking them to stop on the spot and answer a question, you're asking them to sort through 9 streams of thought to pull out one specific moment in time. And that's why you'll find with ADHD, you'll ask them a question, and then at home or at school, 20 minutes later, they'll just say the answer as if
Yeah.
you're still having the same conversation. It's because it took them that long to get to that place to find that moment that you're asking them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just easy to kind of pick up on.
So tell me something. We're talking a little bit about this in an abstract way, but tell me kind of how would you describe the culture, the feel, the environment that is Brightmont? Because I think for neurodivergent kids, environment and culture are so important for them to feel safe and comfortable, willing to self-advocate. I mean, the number of times I have kids with an IEP where the goal is he'll self-advocate. Well, if he doesn't feel safe in that environment, if the culture is not right for him or her for that matter, they're not going to self-advocate. And frankly, I don't think it's a fair expectation that they will self-advocate. So tell us about how you guys create that safe, nurturing, supportive culture and environment.
One is allowing students to know it's okay to be you. I don't have any expectations that you're going to fit a mold. If you need a break and you need to ask for it, it's okay. And I explained to them, the classroom is all about you, just you and the teacher, right? And so we can stop on a dime, we can pause, we can change modalities, we can change conventions, but let's work together. And you build relationship with the student and let them know that you're not just a body. You're a person that I
Hmm.
recognize. I know your interests. I know who you are. And we develop that safe relationship so they feel like I can say whatever I want in here and it's okay and I'm going to be respectful of that.
You mentioned something, you said, I know your interests. And I
Hmm.
think that's a really interesting, sorry to use the word twice, but really interesting point because look, if you've got a classroom with 30 kids in it, it's really hard to be able to spend the time to get to know each individual kid in a way that allows you to know their interests. But it sounds like when you're at Brightmont, this one-to-one environment, one of the advantages and one of the things it sounds like your staff do a really good job of is spending time with that kid so they get to know that kid. They get to know his interests, what he cares about, what matters to him. And that tends to build that relationship. Is that correct?
It's correct. Yeah. And I mean, I'm going to correct a little bit. I mean, I think even teaching a class of 30, I knew every student's interest. I knew every
That's
student
very
well.
impressive,
And
Tony.
and it's because it's not really impressive. It's the matter of paying attention and taking the time to be purposefully looking at what are they wearing, what are they writing, what are they reading, what are they talking about, listening to conversations, even if I'm not engaging. You learn
Yeah.
so much about students, but one to one, yeah, it's definitely very easy to do that because students open up more. They let their
Hmm.
guard down. They don't wear the mask, and you get to truly know what ticks in there, what really gets them excited. And instead, I can say, what? We're going to work on this for 10 minutes. And I know that's your limit. And we're going to
Hmm.
decompress after 10 minutes for just a few minutes. Why don't you show me something that you're interested in?
Yep.
And then we'll jump back in and we'll set a timer and we'll do it. You know, it,
Yep.
but allowing students to know that they're equal partners in the classroom is so important that they feel like I have some control over my learning.
I love that term equal partner and the idea that I have some control over my learning because I think one of the things that every teenager is striving for, no matter what, is a sense of autonomy and control and independence from the teacher, from mom and dad, from pretty much any authority figure, right? That there's a desire to kind of have this autonomy and control. And I think that when you establish there's an equal partnership and you do that by being curious about their interests, giving them the space after a hard point in the lesson to explore their interests, to talk about and learn about their interests. I think it really gives that sense of control. And I talked a lot to parents this idea of that when you tell a kid what to do, you're giving them an incredible opportunity to assert their control and autonomy and independence. All they got to do is say the word no and watch how independent and autonomous. It takes me less than a second to say the word, and I can demonstrate my independence and autonomy and control that I have. And you guys seem to do a really good job of sort of leaning into this idea that this kid is going to want and crave, and understandably so, control and autonomy and the ability to be a part of their education rather than just a sort of a follower. They want to be able to sort of have some level of input in their education. And it sounds like the Brightmont model kind of gives folks that.
It does, and it doesn't happen overnight. It's not like day one they walk in and they automatically open up. Right?
Hmm.
It's a trust building exercise because a lot of them have felt like their trust has been broken. Like they've gone through years of school to where they were felt left behind, they felt ignored, nobody listens to what they need anyway. So to be able to feel like they can have a teacher that will listen, that will accommodate, and that will follow through and not judge them for it. It takes time to build that because you're reconditioning their ability at how they learn.
So tell me something. In that vein, I'm wondering, as a coach, I work with parents and with kids. And one of the things I tell parents a lot is, look, I need you to kind of help me out with specific things because you get your son or daughter for 6 days and 23 hours, and I get them for one. So anything we're working on, if you're not supporting that, if you're not working with us on that, then you can easily undo whatever it is we're trying to do. When you're working one to one with kids, how do you all involve the parents? How do you all kind of make sure that you're what's happening at home is supporting you guys get more time at school, but what's happening at home is supporting what's happening in this academic environment at school?
Yeah, I mean, we can have conversations easy with parents. They can call at any time, and I can talk about what's going on. I've scheduled weekly meetings with families, if it's especially
Wow.
if it's a student that we're really trying to work with and to
Hmm.
develop to make sure that what's going on at home is matching what's going on here. And I think that one of the biggest advantages, and going back just a little bit to when you said what motivates me, and how do we see this happen, is that one of the biggest changes that families see that I love is they say, "You've given me my kid back at home." They're
Yeah.
talking about learning. Their
Yeah.
behaviors are
Yeah.
lower. They have more energy than they used to have. And being able to converse with parents regularly and getting those updates, I find that over time, parents check in less and less because now we've restored faith in them in their child's education. And they know that we are paying attention.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the parents is talking in the chat, talking about how their daughter has a very hard time because school is so boring for them. And I think it's one of the things I love to do with parents with their kids is to have that kid sit with me with their mom and dad or either one, but and to ask that kid, would you rather be bored for a half an hour, like bored out of your mind for a half an hour, or be in pain at about a 6 or a 6.5 for half an hour? About 90% of the time, the kid tells me, "Oh, bored, easy, no problem, easy choice." Every parent I see, their jaw hits the floor. How come nobody told me this sooner? That's why he's having such a hard time reading this book or getting this assignment done. He'd rather be in meaningful levels of pain than be bored, and this assignment is causing him to be bored. So now it's beginning to make sense. Now we're beginning to understand it is boredom for neurodivergent kids, autistic, ADHD. I'm sure there are others out there. It is such a significant pain point relative to our neurotypical peers. It's very difficult for people to understand and appreciate just how meaningful it is to be able to have a conversation with somebody and to go to school and to know that when I go into that classroom, that math class, that English class, that teacher is going to be designing this lesson, designing what we're going to be going over today to make sure that I'm not sitting there bored out of my mind the whole time because they know how much pain I'm in. It's so powerful.
It is. And realistically, the connection of students between knowing what they're supposed to do and what they do is there's a bridge between there. It's not their willingness, it's
Yes.
their interest. Is it connecting with them that makes them want to take that step over the bridge? And a lot of
Yep.
students on the spectrum in particular, they want it, they're very regimented. They want their time to be valuable. Right. And
Hmm.
they want to know that when I'm in class, I'm here to learn. Why aren't we
Hmm.
learning? And why are we
Yes.
spending time on this or this or this? Where in a one-to-one school, you can learn from start to finish because you don't have to do all those other things. And students feel engaged from beginning to end. And
Yep.
that's why you can accomplish a lot more in a shorter amount of time.
Yep.
Students can have shorter schedules, which reduces burnout. I mean,
Yep.
it just cascades
Yep.
for all different kinds of neurodivergence.
I think that was one of the most common things I was asked post-COVID from teenagers who had to go back to a traditional school environment. I don't understand. We did school in 4 hours during COVID. Why do I have to go back to 8 hours now? I don't. I was doing fine with 4 hours. And it's a good question. I can't tell you the answer to that one. You have my empathy. It's really, as you said, kids come home from school and they got nothing left. They are
Mhm.
just absolutely fried from having to try to keep themselves engaged and active and listening and learning when really they're bored or they're struggling to understand the material for whatever reason. And as a result, they're having a hard time staying engaged. Well, now the negative self-talk starts, right? Um,
Mhm.
Tell me, how do you all? I think that's a big issue for folks is this idea that we beat ourselves up, right? You see a lot of kind of defeated kids. I'd imagine when they come in to see Brightmont. I know that in my coaching practice, that's probably the most common thing I see is kids who come in and they're tired. They've been fighting an uphill battle for so long. The poor kids are like Sisyphus rolling the rock up the hill. They just can't catch a break. How do you help? How do you support kids when they come in and they're worn down. They don't have a whole lot left. They've been going to that willpower well for a long time. And, as you just said, and I think it's a really good point, willing yourself to do things is not an effective method. I have a colleague who likes to say, if you can will yourself to do something, I have fantastic news for you. You don't have ADHD, because that's not an effective method. What do you do for those kids, Tony?
Yeah, help them visualize what it can be like. Because when you meet with them, they've been conditioned to see only one type of way education is done. It's kind of like the allegory of the cave, where those prisoners are stuck in the cave and they're finally free. They don't know where to go and what to do because they've never seen the outside world. And so helping them to see that, when you come to school and it's built around you, imagine a world where you're at school for 4 hours, you're getting more learning, but because you're getting more learning, you don't have to do homework. You don't have as much processing and stimulation in the classroom to where you're feeling like you're exhausting yourself just to participate, to where you can get up and move around while you're learning. You know, and then when you get home, you don't necessarily have to do homework because, or at least a lot of homework, because we're
Yep.
able to accomplish so much more in a classroom. So now we've restored balance back to the student, and especially students, again, on the spectrum that are regimented, they respect the fact that you can focus and compartmentalize school. School is going to be during these hours, and you're going to be able to do that. But when you go home,
Hmm.
I'm going to respect your time. And when you're able to create that kind of separation, I think students enjoy school a lot more. They look forward to going
Yeah.
because I'm not going to ask for more than I need for them to be able to learn.
I think this idea around homework is really important. I had one kid, I think he was 9 at the time, and I tell the story a lot because I think it's a really profound question for a 9-year-old. He said, Griff, I don't understand. My mom gets mad at my dad when he brings his work home. How come I need to bring my work home? I said, bud, that's a really good point. I don't have a good answer for you on that one. I don't like homework any more than you do. I think it causes a lot of consternation and a lot of tension among parents and kids. I think it causes a lot of stress throughout the entire household. And I don't know that we have a lot to show for why it's effective. So I think it's really great that you guys are cognizant of that and you work with kids on that and kind of help them figure out, okay, we're not going to have you bring work home. We recognize that's not going to be what's most effective and most helpful for you. Again, going back to just noticing who they are, what they're about, what helps them, what doesn't, and meeting them where they're at, right? It's such an important part of the education process.
It is, and I'm glad you brought up the whole, that we don't want to bring work home, right? Because I say that all the time. It's like, listen, we don't want adults to be workaholics. Why are we
Yeah.
developing and conditioning our kids to be that way? So we're
Yeah.
training them one way and then telling them not to do it when they get older. And to your point, it puts parents in a tough position
Yeah.
because parents want to be parents. Mom
Hmm.
wants to be mom, dad wants to be dad. They don't want to be teacher. They
Yeah.
don't want to be disciplinarian around academics, and in that fight, it breaks that bond so easily
Yes. Yes.
that it creates so much stress and frustration. And having the ability to kind of restore that back again is awesome,
Yep.
and it's why I got into education in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that relationship between mom, dad, and kid is so important, and homework does so much damage to that relationship. One of the things I talk to parents a lot about is the idea that when you get into arguments about homework and we start raising our voices, start getting really frustrated, the message that you're sending implicitly or explicitly is that homework is worth arguing about. Homework is worth damaging our relationship over. And
Mhm.
it's not a message that we really think about in a deliberate way. But unfortunately, you're making the choice in those moments to have that argument, to have that fight about the math homework, rather than say, you know what, this isn't, we're going to find a different way because this isn't worth fighting about because my relationship with you matters more than this homework assignment. But we put so much pressure on these kids and on these parents to do the homework and to do it the right way and to show your work and to do all these that we lose sight of the fact that when they come home, there's a statistic that says you get 90% of your time with your kid before they turn 18, before they go off
Mhm.
after graduating high school. It is so important to be able to just spend that time enjoying your kid for who they are that day at that moment in time. And homework unfortunately takes away from that in such a destructive way. I think it's so important that you guys are aware of that, and also you create opportunities for that kid to get their work done in school so that when they go home, they can be at home, and when they're at school, they can be at school. That delineation is really important for ADHD and autistic kids and kids on the spectrum in general.
It is. And neurodivergence in general, when students get home from 7 hours of school, they're so
Yeah.
overstimulated and they're so
Hmm.
tired of masking and processing so many different streams that a lot of them will just come home and go up to their bedroom and close the door
Yeah.
because they can't take anything else right now.
Yep.
We may, as parents, want them to do chores. We want them to sit down and get homework done. They can't. And
Yeah.
all they can do at that point is just be angry
Yep.
because their brain just cannot handle the amount of stress that it's been under throughout the day.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's important to note, I think you said, the parents want them to do that, and I think for the most part with the kids I see, they want to be able to too. And I
Mhm.
think that's one of the really sad parts, I guess, is that you got a 16-year-old, 15-year-old, whatever age they are, they come home, they know that mom and dad want them to do their homework. They know they want them to do these chores. They want to be able to do these things too, and they struggle to do them. And then what starts is that self-blame, that defeatism, that sort of just, I can't get myself to do these things. And they don't understand why. I have a colleague
Mhm.
who likes to say ADHD is a disease of doing, not of knowing. We know what to do. We just can't get ourselves to do the thing. And it's just such a difficult place to be in at 13, 14 years old.
Yeah, and I see the message there, and I think it fits well with this, is that the other thing with one-to-one is that when students master something, they can move on. I'm
Hmm.
not going to give students work to do just because, and that's where a lot of students get frustrated. They're like, I've already
Hmm.
demonstrated that I know this. Why do I
Yep.
have to do a worksheet of 60 problems to
Yep.
be able to accomplish that? It's not necessary,
Yep.
right? Because especially in things like math, students are going to see the same formulas, the same algorithms over and
Hmm.
over throughout math at different levels. So they're going to constantly get that practice.
Hmm.
So I'm not going to make you do a worksheet with all of that just because. And
Yep.
that's again is restoring value in
Yep.
education.
Yep. And that partnership and that collaboration and that control, right? Because we're not going to
Mhm.
make you do this thing. We're going to notice that you've gotten this done and allow you to have some control. Would it be helpful to give you this worksheet? No, then we're probably not going to make you do it because you've already gotten this down. Now, I
Mhm.
also think it's really important to note, and I think this gets missed a lot, unfortunately. There have been so many studies now. Homework does not actually improve learning outcomes. Your child is not going to understand their math better on any empirical level, at least, because they did those 10 math problems. If they're
Mhm.
having a hard time understanding these math concepts, homework is not actually helping them. What does help them is time with a tutor, time with a teacher, one to one. Stop me if this is familiar for Brightmont people. One-to-one interactions where they can ask questions. They can talk about where they're having a hard time. The teacher or tutor or whoever it is can help them identify and understand exactly what's challenging about that part of the equation or understanding what's hard about that part of the math set and being able to focus in on that, understand it, practice it a little bit, and then get back to the next thing. That's where kids are going to thrive when they're having a hard time. Doing homework to beat the idea into your brain doesn't actually end up doing a whole lot, but again, cause consternation at home. Um,
Mhm.
it doesn't end up being worth it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it's a difficult sell for most schools because they do have this requirement. They do have this sort of systemic approach to things that it's very difficult to have schools that are able to and willing to, frankly, remove homework the way Brightmont is able to. It's just a fantastic component of the program you are able to offer. Um,
Mhm.
I want to talk, Tony, a little bit before we get too far lost here about the public private partnership that you guys are able to have and kind of how you all collaborate with some of the public schools and some of the public systems. What does that look like, and how do you all make that work?
You know, I find that public schools, especially like the special education department, they want what's best for the kids, but a lot of times they don't have the resources
Hmm.
or the systems to be able to do it. And so when with the districts that we've worked with, having regular collaboration with them on this is what we're doing with this student, it helps so much because we're able to create the environment of the student that can help them really reach their potential where they might be put in a resource room, in a
Yeah.
public school where a bright student who maybe have trouble focusing is put into a room with a student that is also bright but might have behaviors. Well, you get somebody with behaviors triggering somebody that has focus issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
not going to get anywhere academically. So then you end up finding that the academic ceiling comes way down their ability, right? And
Hmm.
so I find that districts do want to partner. They don't want to turn over. They want to partner and they want to find collaborators, I think, that'll support students. And it's not every district, but I think a lot more districts are coming around that way to know that we have to broaden our ability to work with all different kinds of students. And that means we have to look outside always just the public group classroom format.
And Tony, just for the folks who are listening and some of the parents who are listening in, can you talk a little bit about kind of maybe what some of those partnerships have looked like? I think it's difficult for folks if you haven't seen of or heard of a Brightmont public district collaboration or partnership to kind of envision the role Brightmont might have in that partnership and how you all might support the student in that partnership. Talk a little bit about that for us.
Yeah, so a lot of the districts here, at least in Washington State, I know, will be able to look at students that where they know we can't serve this IEP. We just cannot meet the needs of the student. And so they will look for opportunities to maybe place a student in a private school, whether it's Brightmont or one of the other ones around, where they feel like they're going to best meet the goals that the student has that they're trying to work on. And with that, it becomes a team approach to where we're meeting the goals that are in the IEPs and working with the districts on the specifically designed instruction around developing those skills while getting students to grade level and while earning credits that students need toward graduation.
So you mentioned this IEP and not being able to fill that need. And I know, Tony, you mentioned very early on in the conversation this evening that you've got quite a wealth of experience in private and public schools. And now at Brightmont, you've been there for 13 years. Can you tell us a little bit about when you were in public schools and private schools for that matter, what did you notice as far as the gaps in the system? Now that you're at Brightmont, kind of looking back at it, are IEPs an effective tool for kids? Do you see that they end up coming up short a lot of times? And just what are some of the things maybe that Brightmont, what are some of the gaps that Brightmont's able to fill given their model that the public education system just isn't able to fill really?
I feel like a lot of the IEPs, especially the ones that I read now, and even when I was teaching too, it's very judgmental. And there's a lot of history built in there that
Hmm.
doesn't allow for opportunities to where a student can redefine themselves. It more
Hmm.
labels them on who they've been and who you should expect them to be. And
Yes.
I think what it does is it eliminates our ability to look at potential. So when I get IEPs for students, I look at what accommodations have they had. I look at what are
Hmm.
their diagnoses, what are some of their experiences. I'll rarely look at past teacher comments and things like that because a lot of it's like, well, on this one day they jumped up and they screamed their head off, and I, news to everybody, neurodivergence has bad days.
Yeah.
It happens. Right. And so yeah, so that's kind of how I kind of look at it. And when I was a teacher, I was so overloaded with IEPs that
Yeah.
again sometimes I find that it over accommodates students
Hmm.
instead of looking at, instead of trying to figure out how do I help each student assimilate their neurodivergence to me, how can
Hmm.
I change myself as a teacher in my environment for students to all be effective? It takes work,
Yeah.
but it can be
Yeah.
done.
Yeah. I think that IEPs are one of those things I've noticed that they are very well intentioned and that everybody involved in making them is trying really hard to develop something that will help that student. But my experience is the same as yours, that they're very judgmental. I read a lot of things like he doesn't use his time wisely. And I think to myself, yes, maybe that's the case, but it's worth exploring why. What's hard about, he knows that he needs to get this assignment done. He knows, or she knows, this paper needs to get done, but they're still struggling to do it during that study hall, that free period.
Mhm.
It begs the question, how come? Why? What's hard about this for that student? When we look at just he doesn't use their time wisely, or he or she loses focus very easily, we're passing judgment, but we're not asking questions. We're not learning about that kid and about what's hard about this for that kid, what might make it easier for that kid. We're not able to implement effective accommodations because we're not learning about what is challenging for that individual student. We're just looking at the behavior. We're just looking at the outcome and making an assessment based off of that. And unfortunately, most of the IEPs I read, I don't know if you had a similar experience, but for most of my kids, untimed testing is actually not all that helpful. It just gives me more time to start the window squirrel out there for a while longer, but it doesn't actually help me because there's a reason I'm distracted, right? I'm escaping something that's very hard for my brain to do. One of my biggest frustrations, I have ADHD. I need to talk out loud to problem solve. The impairment in my working memory means that talking out loud is the way that my brain solves problems, but I can't talk during a test. It's not
Yeah.
permitted.
Yep. And I'm exactly the same way. I have to talk out loud, but I also have to distract myself. For me, focusing a lot of times on one thing, it is painful.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
and so what one teacher might deem, or one person might deem, as a student as being distracted, the student, through their eyes, they're actually helping their learning.
Yep.
Right? Because what people don't understand is that when a student, a lot of times with ADHD, especially if they're reflective, it's going to sit there and look off in the distance or be like scrolling through their phone. But in
Mm-hmm.
the end, they're listening, and
Yep.
it's able to kind of be one of those streams of thought that they're doing. It's
Yep.
just that it's not comfortable because
Yep.
it's not how that person that's watching it has
Mm-hmm.
experienced it. Right. And
Yep.
so that's where you were talking about getting to know the student. It is so key.
Yep. It doesn't look like focus to the average person, but in point of fact, you absolutely are. Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think you alluded to this, but one of the things that comes up a lot in these IEP meetings for parents I talk to is the trolley problem, right? We can't have him do this because it'll mess up the other 29 kids in the classroom, right? He can't walk around in the background. He'll distract the other students. Well, the way it's being framed is we have a trolley problem. You're asking my kid to be the one on the tracks instead of 29 kids. And in point of fact, the mere presence of those kids is distracting my child. So, this idea that we need to meet the kid where they're at and to fair, okay, you need to move. So, okay, that's going to help you. How do we create an environment? What's it going to look like when we create this environment for you to be able to move without being completely disruptive? How do we encourage the other kids in the classroom to not get distracted by that movement? Let's face it, they can also not get distracted by things the same way we're asking the ADHD kid or the neurodivergent kid to not get distracted by the things around him that are distracting his brain from things, right? It's really meeting them where they're at.
It is. And in a public, whether you're in a group classroom or in an individual classroom, you should all use different modalities of learning, right?
Yeah.
And so for a student that needs to move, gosh, why not do something that involves movement or something that's tactile, and break your class up into 10 or 15-minute chunks. A student with ADHD, they can focus for 10 minutes. Then shift to something that's going to allow them to get things moving a little bit, and then go to something else. But a student who has to sit there and listen to a lecture, ADHD or not, I mean, for that long of a time, or a time where they feel like they have to sit there and write in quiet, it is, and I think you described as painful.
Yeah. So now, one of the things that I see a lot from parents and public school systems, and I'm wondering how you guys tackle this at Brightmont, is this desire for kids to do things, quote unquote, independently. Right now, as an ADHD person and a parent of ADHD kids, you may have noticed that your son or daughter does a very good job when other people are sitting next to them doing work or talking about the work with them. That it is, in fact, easier for me to do things with somebody else than it is to do it independently. One of the things I tell parents is please don't tell your kid that they need to learn to do things on their own. They don't. What they need to learn is when something is very hard for me, it's a lot easier when somebody else is in the room helping me along, talking to me, giving me support, just being there. Just the physical presence is oftentimes enough. How do you help kids? How do you work with kids to kind of help them understand that sometimes it's not about doing things independently. Sometimes it's about having somebody else there with you to help you through that process.
I mean, there's a difference between doing something independently and doing something completely alone, right? And
I
so
like
body
that.
doubling is so important because
Yeah.
and I used to do this with my daughter who, struggles with, her brain moves very fast too.
Hmm.
But just sitting there while she's working and being a presence helps. It, it,
Yep.
it just helps them to just kind of feel safe, to feel focused a bit more.
Hmm.
And just that body doubling idea is so effective for people. And when you're one to one, you constantly have a body double. Doesn't mean I'm doing the work for you or I'm telling you everything you need to do. It
Yep.
just means I'm here to let you know that I am here. I can support you if you need it. But a lot of students don't.
You're a safety net almost.
Yeah.
And that kind of allows kids to maybe do things that make them a little bit more uncomfortable. They're not quite as confident in, they're not quite as certain of, to kind of put themselves out there a little bit. The analogy I always give parents is, look, if you're a trapeze artist, you're more willing to try new things and take risks if there's a net underneath you than if there's not. And that
Mhm.
only makes sense. And when an ADHD kid or a neurodivergent kid has that net underneath him in the form of a trusted adult or a trusted friend next to them that is going to help them, that is willing and able to answer questions and give them support and help them think about things differently if they need that kind of help, to ask them questions that just help them think out loud. It's a tremendously powerful tool to have that safety net there. It just
Mhm.
does wonders for kids. And it's one of the things I often encourage parents to do, as you said, is to sit with your son or daughter while they're doing the work. Don't
Mhm.
send them off to their room to do the work. Sit with them at the kitchen table. Sit with them in the living room. If they need to watch the baseball game or whatever it is while they're doing the work, that's okay if they're able to set it. They're able to focus. I've got one kid, he's funny. He listens to Russian rap music, Tony, to help him do work because he doesn't know the words. He won't sing along, but he doesn't like silence or orchestra music. He likes to have lyrics. But when he can sing
Mhm.
along, he gets distracted. But boy, has it been a chore to get the school to allow him to listen to music while he's doing that because it's distracting for him. Well, no, it actually helps this young man. I have another kid who could never do that, and they're both very ADHD. Right? It's really, there is such an individual nature to how ADHD manifests for people. And one thing I love about the Brightmont model is that academically speaking, you can really learn about the kid, figure out how his ADHD is manifesting, why it's manifesting that way, what's helped him in the past with these kinds of situations and circumstances, and implement those things with him going forward. It's
Mhm.
just such a powerful and effective model.
Yeah, no, I agree. And one of the things I think that Brightmont's able to do is to dig even deeper with students in terms of things like ADHD. A lot of
Hmm.
times we use ADHD so broadly, right? But
Hmm.
when I talk to students about their ADHD or talk to them about how they learn, I use terms, I don't use hyperactive, I use supercharged. Instead of inattentive, I use reflective.
Yep.
Instead of combined, I use dynamic. Because what it does, it helps to identify that just because you have ADHD doesn't mean you're going to be hyperactive. Just
Yep.
because you're ADHD doesn't mean that you're going to exhibit all these traits or you're going to hate this or not like this, right?
Hmm.
And so I think Brightmont is able to really dig down deeper, figure out. So with the ADHD, it's just a label. Okay,
Yep.
from there, let's figure out what are the things that's going on inside your brain that causes the label, and let's
Yes.
work with that to help you to learn, not
Yep.
focus on the label.
Clay, I like this idea of sort of reframing things. You said sort of reflective versus inattentive. One of the things I tell kids a lot is you're not distracted. You're just focused on something else.
Hmm.
That's not distracted. That's something else is more interesting for you, and you want to focus on that right now. So that's what you decide to do. I don't think anybody gets distracted. That's like, just with motivation. I have a colleague who'll tell you that you wouldn't be alive if you weren't motivated. You're just not motivated to do homework. You're motivated to do something else, but you're not motivated to do homework. So what we need to figure out essentially is how can we help you be motivated to do X, right? How do we increase your motivation or decrease the amount of motivation that task requires of you? I have one student, he hates to read. He likes to bake while he listens to audiobooks. That decreases the amount of motivation it takes him to read because he gets to bake while he listens to these books. So
Mhm.
it's just this idea of reframing things is such a powerful tool for kids who are neurodivergent and ADHD. It's really helpful, I'll tell you.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, I think that with creating that, it helps them to not look at themselves as broken. It's
Yeah,
look at it as a strength. I mean, good heavens, I think that most CEOs are ADHD because
yeah,
who's better to multitask than somebody that
yeah,
has 9 different streams of thought
yep,
and be able, but what you do is you learn to be able to control and to jump from one to another.
yep,
And that, to me, that's something that I do every single day. And people are like, how do you do that? You're like talking about Minecraft, this person, and the next minute you're jumping about academics and you're talking to this teacher about this. It's because I've conditioned myself to do that over time.
yeah,
And I think I
yeah,
would be bored if I only had to do one thing. I
yeah.
thrive in chaos.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It keeps things interesting, right? And again, we
Yeah.
don't do boring very well. It's,
Yeah.
we talk about this a lot, but it's how are you going to make something that is very boring more interesting? I tell a lot of parents I brush my teeth by watching SportsCenter every day. It's how I pass the 2 minutes. The 2 minutes staring in the mirror are horribly boring. But if I can pace around and we'll listen to the SportsCenter announcer, I'm good. 2 minutes flies by, right?
Yeah.
But we got to find creative ways to take things that are otherwise mundane and boring and find ways to make them interesting. Find ways to challenge yourself in otherwise very boring circumstances. It makes a huge difference for kids who are neurodivergent.
Yeah.
I
This
want to,
comment, it just made it was really funny to me. This comment, does anybody else love to drive? Because it requires you to think about 34 things at once.
yes,
I commute 2 to 2.5 hours each way to work
no,
every day. And
wow,
I love it because just for this reason, I can decompress everything that's in my head while I'm
yep,
driving because my streams of thought are focused on driving and the things around me
hmm
subconsciously. So I can actually talk out loud, and a lot of
yes,
times I'll just open up voice notes and I just
hmm
record anything that's on my head, and I will jump from topic to topic to topic,
yep,
and it feels so refreshing and
yep.
relaxing to be able to do that without other people in the car.
Yep. I used to drive from Philadelphia to Boston on a pretty much a monthly or biweekly basis. And it was one of the best things in the world for me because I got to talk to myself and think out loud about just what's going on in my life, problems I need to address, things I want to think about, talk about, learn about. The point, I tell the story a lot. I actually got pulled over in Connecticut or New York once. This is before Bluetooth and all of that for talking on my phone. And I had to
Yeah.
show the officer my call log so he'd believe. I said, I was talking to myself. I need to talk out loud to think. I didn't realize why that was at the time. And I was 19, 20 years old. Now I have a bit of an understanding, but it's really, driving is one of the places where people who are neurodivergent do their best thinking because you can talk to yourself and not have no one is watching you, no one is listening to you. You have just complete privacy and a long period of time to do that thinking, to do that talking. It's fantastic.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. I do my best writing. And that's when I do all my writing is when I'm driving because I have voice notes, probably like 20 different ones on different topics. And it's whatever a topic I feel like I want to talk about. I just click it and I just talk. And then when I'm ready to put something together, I take all those thoughts together and I
yeah,
compile them, I edit it and put it together. But all that comes from driving.
yeah,
And because it just allows you just to dig into what's on your mind.
yeah. No, it really is such a powerful tool. I think we could probably talk about all the different ways we kind of help ourselves think and manage our ADHD for hours, frankly, Tony. But we got to start wrapping up, unfortunately. Before we do, I want to make sure, Tony, I give you the opportunity. Is there anything else you wanted to add tonight? Anything that you think we should let folks know about before we begin to wrap up here this evening?
I think that as parents or even as educators, one of the biggest things that we can do is have patience and to listen and to
Hmm.
just pay attention. So many times we jump to conclusions to want to define um, where students are and to define what we expect from them or what they need to be. You know, with ADHD in particular, you get thoughts in your head, and sometimes they cannot move on until they get
Hmm.
that thought out. And that's autism too, right?
Yep.
And so we have to provide those opportunities for them to be themselves. You know, love your child for who they are, embrace who they are, and help them recognize the strengths. Don't be disappointed in the lack of executive function or because a school says they got an F because they didn't turn in their homework. You know, because
Yep.
that's not who they are. So
Yep.
tap into that and you'll find a lot more joy in working with your child.
I'll be brief with this. I won't tell the whole story, but I had a parent who once said to me after a very difficult experience with her child, she said, after I finished grounding her for life, what I realized is that this didn't happen in a vacuum, that I contributed to this decision that had such tremendous consequences. What I realized is I need to start enjoying my daughter for who she was right now and stop worrying about who she would be, could be, or should be. And when I did that, it improved my relationship dramatically. So I think to your point, Tony, I just being patient and enjoying your kids for who they are today, the things they struggle with, the things they excel with from start to finish. I think that is probably the most impactful advice I have heard from a parent, and that I would give a parent going forward. So I think it's a great way to start sort of wrapping up because we are running out of time for this evening, folks. I want to take a moment to thank everybody for being here. We have a bunch of guests tonight, and I want to just take a minute to thank everybody for taking the time to come and sit with us and talk with us and ask questions and engage with us on this because I think it's such an important thing for us to be talking about. Um, Sonia, can you quickly tell us a little bit about how to contact you or a Brightmont campus in folks' area if they think it'd be a good fit for them or for their kid?
Yeah, they can go to brightmontacademy.com and there's information on all the campuses, the directors, the locations, the hours, and you can get that kind of information there. If somebody in the Seattle area wants to get a hold of me, they can reach me at tony.beals@brightmontacademy.com. And I'm happy to chat through and help them figure out what a good solution is.
All right, folks, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I'm your host, Griffin Rouse. I'm an ADHD coach, and you can contact me at highsierracoaching.com or griffin@highsierracoaching.com. I hope you all enjoyed the podcast this evening. Tune in next month. Hopefully, we'll have another great guest, and we will see you all next month. Have a great night.